The night shift at the recycling yard in Phoenix runs from 10 to 6, and most of the time, nothing happens that isn't loud and boring. That's why what happened in April of 2022 stuck with me. It didn't feel dramatic while it was happening. It felt like paperwork. Our plant sits off the 10, near a stretch of warehouses that all look the same from the road. Fenced yard, corrugated roof, a scale for trucks, an intake shed with a little office that always smells like burnt coffee and hot electronics. The main line is a shredder that eats anything from routers to old projectors, plus a chute for hard drives with its own crusher. Everything gets weighed in, logged, sorted. When drives come through, they go into a locked bin and get destroyed on shift. That's how it's supposed to work. I'd been there about a year at that point. Second shift guy, then bumped to overnights because I asked for it. Quieter, fewer people. The manager, Ruben, was fine with it as long as the load counts matched in the morning and the yard wasn't on fire. The first time the group showed up, it was a Tuesday, around midnight. 2 men in a white box truck, no company logo, just a template. The driver did most of the talking. Big guy, mid-40s, khaki shirt tucked in, aviator glasses, even though the sun had been down for 6 hours. His buddy was younger, quieter, hovered by the truck. I'll call the driver Wes because that's what he wrote on the intake form for the contact line. Their paperwork was clean. Bill of lading, chain of custody form, a certificate of decommissioning stamped by an IT vendor I'd never heard of. The client was listed as a healthcare group out of Mesa. Server chassis, blade units, a stack of drive caddies. They paid the disposal fee up front on a company card, and Wes made a joke about how he hated coming out this late, but the boss wanted it done off hours for the insurance. I logged it, weighed the truck, waved them off the scale. They were out in 20 minutes. I only really looked at what they brought me after they left. The pallets were shrink-wrapped tight, and when I cut into the first one, the smell threw me off. Warm plastic and that faint ozone thing electronics get when they've been powered on recently. Not the sweet dust smell of stuff that's been sitting in a closet for a decade. The chassis were the current generation. I mean current. I'd seen the same model in a supplier catalog Ruben had on his desk from that same quarter. Bezels intact, rails still in the boxes. 2 of the units still had the little green LEDs on the front, the ones that don't go out until you actually cut power. I pulled a caddy out to send to the crusher and stopped. The drives were still in them. Not shredded, not degaussed, not wiped. No little sanitized sticker, no punch through the platter housing. Just live drives sitting in trays, seated in a chassis that had been running not long before someone loaded it onto a truck. Okay, I thought. Weird. Not my problem. My job is destruction, not investigation. If somebody wants to pay to have functional gear turned into shred, that's their money. I ran the load through. Drives to the crusher, chassis to the shredder line. It took about an hour. I filled out the destruction log and went back to sipping bad coffee and watching a raccoon try to get into the dumpster by the fence. For a couple of nights after that, I didn't think much of it. Weird pickups happen. Somebody's inventory guy quits, a supervisor gets nervous, gear goes out sooner than it should. Life. 2 weeks later, they came back. Same truck, same 2 guys, same paperwork template with the same vendor stamp. Different serial numbers on the certificate, same client in Mesa. This time Wes didn't make small talk. He handed me the folder, watched me sign, and got back in the cab before I'd even torn my copy off. That's when it started to sit weird with me. I've had customers who bring stuff in every month. Big offices, dental groups, a couple of school districts. They usually chat, they complain about their IT guy, ask if we take monitors, ask about a receipt. Wes and his buddy didn't ask anything. They didn't look around. Wes checked the office window every time he stepped out of the truck, like he wanted to know if anyone else was inside. I took a walk around the pallets after they left, this time before opening anything. 2 of the outer boxes had shipping labels on them that hadn't been peeled all the way off. Not from the healthcare group in Mesa, from a leasing company in Tempe. The dates on the labels were from 6 weeks earlier, which meant somewhere between Tempe and my yard, that gear had passed through the healthcare place, gotten decommissioned by a vendor nobody could Google, and shown up at my dock with intact drives. I cut a pallet open, same story. Chassis warm, LEDs still lit on 1 unit, drives seated, no destruction marks. I pulled a drive out and set it on the bench and just stood there for a minute. The chassis had asset tags on the sides, little inventory stickers with barcodes. One of them still had a color-coded band from what looked like a data center rack, the kind you use to mark hot rows from cold rows. That isn't something you put on a machine you're planning to shred. That's something you put on a machine you expect to keep running. Here's the thing. In our world, if you want data gone, you don't ship the box across town at midnight in an unmarked truck. You wipe it in place. You destroy the drives on site. There are companies with a van and a crusher that show up in your parking lot and turn your platters into confetti while you watch. It isn't expensive. Any hospital knows that. Any leasing outfit knows that. It's the default. Sending functional drives out to a recycler and hoping they get eaten by a shredder without anybody checking is not a data protection plan. It's a hope. That's what got me. Not a monster. A hope. I didn't confront anybody. I don't get paid to confront anybody. What I did was pull the whole load off the line and roll it into the back bay where we stage overflow. Then I texted Ruben and said I wanted to hold a batch until morning, and I'd explain when he got in. He came in early, coffee in one hand, cigarette he wasn't supposed to have in the other. I walked him through it. The certificates, the still warm gear, the labels, the fact that the drives hadn't been touched. He didn't say much. He asked me if I'd opened any of the drives. I said no. There was a form we were supposed to fill in for anomalies. Ruben had it in a drawer somewhere. Nobody had touched it in the year I'd been there. He pulled it out, spread it on the desk, looked at it like he'd never seen it before, then set it aside and picked up the phone anyway. He called the client's own IT department directly, not the vendor on the certificate, the actual healthcare group in Mesa, listed on the bill of lading. He got the IT lead on the phone before 9. I could only hear Ruben's side. It was mostly uh-huh and no, still sealed, and one long pause where he looked at me like something had just shifted under him. The IT guy drove out that afternoon, skinny, glasses, sweating through his shirt because it was already 90-something outside. He brought a laptop and a write blocker and asked to see 3 drives from 3 different chassis, chosen at random. I picked them. He plugged the first one in. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said quietly, "This shouldn't be on here." The drive had patient records on it, not encrypted, not even in a locked folder. Names, dates of birth, addresses, insurance IDs, scanned intake forms, imaging reports. The second drive had backup snapshots of an EHR database. The third had email archives, all of it plain, all of it readable off the shelf. He asked to take the drives with him. Ruben told him no. They stayed with us until we had something in writing, and then he called our compliance contact. By that evening, the healthcare group had lawyers involved. By the next week, there were federal people involved. I didn't learn everything that happened after. Some of it I heard through Ruben, and some of it I read months later when a summary of the enforcement action showed up in a trade newsletter he printed out and pinned to the intake shed wall. The Mesa provider got hit hard. HIPAA violation, failure to ensure destruction of protected data at end of life, the works. The vendor on the certificate turned out to be basically 2 guys and a rented storage unit. Wes wasn't his real name. I never found out what was. The truck didn't come back. I wasn't surprised. What I did next was the boring part, and the part I'm actually proud of. I wrote up a 1-page intake protocol for server class equipment. Any chassis newer than 5 years, any drives arriving unsanitized, any certificate from a vendor we couldn't verify by phone, and we hold the load in the back bay and call the listed client directly before anything hits the shredder. Ruben signed off on it. It's still on the wall by the scale, laminated, curling at one corner from the heat. People think this job is about breaking things. Most of it is. But every so often, somebody hands you a stack of paperwork that's a little too clean and a palette that's a little too warm, and you get to decide whether you're going to be the last person who could have looked. I looked. The place was called Riverside on the paperwork, but it was nowhere near a river. It sat on a dead-end industrial road in Lower Price Hill, Cincinnati, wedged between a metal recycler and a fenced-off lot full of school buses that had been there long enough to grow weeds through the tires. I took the night shift in October 2020 because nothing else was hiring and I needed insurance. By January, the routine felt like it always had been mine. Nights were quiet. Bodies came in during the day, refrigerated. My shift started at 10. I ran the retorts, logged everything, did the cleaning, and by 4 in the morning, I was usually just sitting in the office watching whatever was on my phone. The place smelled like a mix of clean industrial soap and something underneath it that no soap ever really got rid of. Not rot, more like scorched dust. It settled in your clothes. My girlfriend at the time started leaving my work shirts in a separate bag by the back door. The director was a guy named Gary, late 50s, thin, wore golf polos to a job that had no reason for golf polos. He was in every morning by 6:30, cheerful in a way that felt rehearsed. He'd bring donuts sometimes, ask about the Bengals. I liked him fine. He hired me over the phone without asking many questions, which at the time I took as a good sign. The first time I noticed, it was a Wednesday. I remember because I'd just gotten off a run of 3 cremations back to back, which was heavy for a night. I was labeling the temporary containers, matching them to the ID tags, and when I set them on the shelf for the day crew to transfer into the permanent urns, I counted 4 containers, not 3. I stood there for a second and counted again, 4. I figured I'd miscounted the tags when I started. Long night, I let it go. The next week, it happened again. I did 2 that shift. In the morning, before I clocked out, there were 3 containers on the shelf. The extra one had a tag on it, handwritten, not printed from our system. Just a name and a date. I didn't recognize the name from anything I'd processed. I asked Gary about it when he came in. He was pouring coffee, back to me, and he said without turning around, "Oh, that, technical residue. Sometimes we do a cleaning run on the retort and there's enough material to consolidate. We label it so it doesn't get mixed up." I asked what happened to it. "Waste stream," he said. "There's a whole protocol. Don't worry about it." He turned then and smiled at me and asked if I wanted a donut. I took the donut. I didn't push. For about 2 weeks I let it sit. But once you start noticing something, it's hard to unnotice. I started counting on purpose. Some nights the numbers matched. Some nights there was 1 extra. Once there were 2, always with the handwritten tags, always names I didn't recognize. The retort doesn't leave behind that much residue between runs. I knew that. I'd done my training. You sweep it, you brush it out, and what you get is maybe a few grams of gray dust, not enough to fill anything. Whatever was in those extra containers was a full body's worth. 5, 6 pounds. I weighed 1, on a Tuesday, just to be sure. 5 pounds, 4 ounces. That is not cleaning residue. That is a person. I started coming in 15 minutes early to look at the daybook. Gary kept it on the desk in the front office, an old green ledger, and next to it, a stack of family paperwork waiting to be filed. I had a reason to be in there. I did the coffee for the morning shift, so no one thought anything of it. The paperwork is where I saw it. Every urn that leaves the building has a chain of custody form, family name, funeral home if there was one, contract number, weight, date of the service. I found the name from that Tuesday container. It was on a form dated for pickup that Friday. The family was in Norwood. There was a signed contract, full package, bronze urn, viewing, the works, almost $4,000. I stood there in the office with that piece of paper and my hands got cold. Not from fear exactly, just cold, like the blood went somewhere else for a minute. I put the paperwork back where I found it and went home. For 3 days, I didn't do anything. I kept thinking, maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe there's a body I missed on the intake. Maybe the day crew handled something I didn't know about. I ran through it every way I could, and none of it worked. The intake log was mine. I signed for every body that came in on my shift, and the daytime intake was in a separate book, and I checked that too, using the coffee run as cover. The numbers didn't add up. There were more urns leaving than there were people coming in. I started keeping my own list. On my phone, in a note I password locked. Date, name on the extra tag, weight if I got a chance to check it, and later, when I could match it, the family it went to. I wanted to be sure before I said anything to anyone. That's what I told myself at least. The truth was, I was scared, and I didn't know who to trust. Gary had been at Riverside for 22 years. That was on a plaque in the front hallway. He knew everyone. He knew the county coroner by first name. I'd heard him on the phone with him, easy and joking. He knew the funeral directors and the hospice people and the guy who did our inspections. If I walked into a police station and said the crematorium director was selling ashes that weren't real, I had a phone note and a story and nothing else. He had 2 decades and a plaque. So I kept counting. I got smarter about it. I started photographing the handwritten tags on my phone. Quick shots, tag in one hand, camera in the other, then straight into the locked note. I stopped weighing the containers because the scale was in the front room and I couldn't guarantee I was alone with it. I stuck to what I could see and what I could copy without leaving a mark. The families weren't the same. That's what stayed with me the longest. If it had been one funeral home laundering something, or one specific hospice, I could have understood. But the names I was matching went all over. A family in Delhi, a woman in Oakley who lost her husband, a guy from up in Fairfield who'd come down to bury his mother, different funeral homes, different backgrounds. No pattern I could see, except that each of them had paid, and each of them had walked out with an urn. I did the math one Sunday afternoon, sitting in my car in a Kroger parking lot, because I didn't want to do it at home. 3 months, 26 extras. If the average package was $3,000, and I think it was more, that was somewhere around $80,000 that had come in against nothing on the books. Something had to be in those urns. I tried not to think about that part. I really did. There was one night, late January, when Gary came in around 1 in the morning. He'd never done that before. He said he'd forgotten a folder he needed for a meeting. He walked past me in the back, said hey, went into the office. I heard the drawer open and close. Then he stood in the doorway of the retort room for maybe 30 seconds, watching me sweep. He didn't say anything. Then he said, "You're doing a good job, you know. You're careful. I appreciate that." I said thanks. He said, "Not everybody would be." Then he left. I didn't sleep much that week. I gave my notice in the second week of February. I told Gary I'd gotten offered a day job with better hours, which was a lie he didn't have any way to check. He shook my hand. He said if it didn't work out, I was always welcome back. He gave me a card for a steakhouse, a $50 gift certificate, and said to take my girl out. My last shift, I did everything by the book. I logged out clean. I left the ledger the way I found it. 2 weeks after that, from a library computer downtown, I wrote a letter to the Ohio State Licensing Board. I didn't sign it. I gave them the name of the facility, the pattern of the discrepancies, the approximate count, the fact that the extra earns were going out to real paying families. I told them where to look and what to compare. I mailed it from a blue box on Vine Street, and I walked away. I don't know what happened after that. I looked once, a few months later, and Riverside was still operating. I looked again a year in, and the website was gone, but that could mean anything. I never called anyone. I never went back. What I think about still is what those families got, because something is in those urns. Something has weight, something looks like ash, something a person can hold in their lap on the drive home and set on a mantle and talk to on a Sunday morning. I've thought about kilns, and I've thought about incinerators, and I've thought about the recycler next door and the fenced lot full of buses. I've thought about all the places in a city where a thing that used to be a person could go, and about all the places where a thing that isn't a person could come from. I don't have an answer. I don't want one. The people who paid, they got their goodbye, and they still have it, wherever they keep it. I'm not going to be the one to take that from them, but sometimes, when I drive through Lower Price Hill, I don't look down that street. The call came in around 10:40 p.m. on a Wednesday, and dispatch had it flagged as a low-priority cardiac. That's not really code language for nothing. It just means someone on the phone sounded calm, and the patient was awake and talking. Slow night, cold rain, leaves stuck to the windshield in that wet October way. My partner behind the wheel was a guy named Reese, 6 months on the job, still writing down street names like he'd get quizzed on them. The address was in one of those subdivisions off Southport Road, where every house looks the same and the mailboxes are numbered, but the numbers aren't in order. Ranch homes, one-car garages, above-ground pools long since drained. We pulled up to a beige house with a Halloween wreath still on the door from what might have been last year. Porch light on, curtains closed, no car in the driveway, though the garage was shut. A woman opened the door before I could knock. She was maybe 30, 32, dark hair pulled back tight, clean gray sweatshirt, jeans, house slippers with a little bit of dog hair on them, which was strange because I hadn't heard a dog. She smiled the way a receptionist smiles, professional and immediate, like she'd been standing there waiting for the exact moment we arrived. "Thank you for coming. He's in the back bedroom. This way, please." Not "help him," not "hurry," just "this way, please." She held the door open and walked us through the living room. The place was tidy in a way that felt staged. Couch pillows all pointing the same direction. A stack of magazines on the coffee table, not fanned out, just squared up. The TV was off. No dishes in the sink that I could see through the kitchen doorway. Nothing on the counter except a pill organizer, one of those big weekly ones with the days labeled, and the compartment for Wednesday PM was already empty. The hallway smelled like clean laundry and old man. That's a specific smell if you've done this job. Aftershave that stopped being made in the 80s, plus whatever moisturizer he'd been using for his hands. Nothing wrong with it, just familiar. Underneath it, faint, something floral. A woman's body wash, in a house where a widower supposedly lived alone. The patient was in bed, propped up on 2 pillows. Late 70s, thin, wearing a plaid pajama shirt buttoned all the way to the collar. Glasses on the nightstand next to a glass of water. He looked at me when I came in. Didn't look at her. That was the first thing. "Hey there, sir. I'm with the ambulance. What's going on tonight?" "Just a little tightness," he said. His voice was quiet. "In my chest. Comes and goes." I got to work. Vitals, 12 lead, the usual. Reese knelt on the other side of the bed with the monitor. The woman didn't leave. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching. Not watching him, watching me. Family members do this all the time. They hover, they ask questions, they pace. This wasn't that, she was still. Her eyes tracked my hands. When I opened the drug bag, her eyes went to the drug bag. When I pulled up his sleeve to get a blood pressure, her eyes went to the cuff. She held her phone in her right hand, screen turned toward her leg. His pressure was fine. Heart rate a little slow but nothing alarming. EKG clean enough, skin warm and dry. Whatever tightness he had was either gone or it was something we weren't going to catch sitting in his bedroom. I asked him the standard questions. Any history, any meds, any allergies? He answered each one after a small pause, and after every answer he glanced past my shoulder. Not right at her, just in her direction. Checking. I heard her phone click, a soft tap. I looked up and she was typing something with her thumb, phone raised now to about waist level. She caught me looking and smiled again. I just keep notes, she said. For his doctor. Sure. I turned back to him. Sir, who's your primary? He opened his mouth and she answered. Dr. Alden, Community South. We saw him last month. I didn't look at her, kept my eyes on the old man. That right, sir? He nodded. His nod was small. Reese caught my eye across the bed. He'd noticed. Reese was new, but he wasn't stupid. He gave me the tiniest lift of his eyebrows, which in our language meant, you want me to do something. I gave him the tiniest shake of my head back. Not yet. I sat down on the edge of the bed, which you're not really supposed to do, but I did it anyway. Put myself between the patient and the door. How you feeling right now, sir? On a scale of 1 to 10, compared to when you called. He looked at me, really looked. His eyes were wet in that way. Old men's eyes are wet just from being old, and I couldn't tell if there was anything else in them or if I was making it up. I didn't call, he said, quiet, almost like a question, from the doorway. I called for him. He gets confused about the phone. He closed his eyes. That was the second thing. I've done this job for 9 years. People close their eyes for a lot of reasons. Pain, exhaustion. This wasn't either. This was the kind of closing where you decide, just for a second, that you're going to be somewhere else. I asked her, still not turning around. And you're his, remind me, daughter? No, niece, neighbor. I take care of him. That was how she said it. Not, I'm his caregiver. Not, I'm the aide from the agency. Just, I take care of him, flat, the way you'd say I feed the cat. I stood up, my knees popped. I made a show of adjusting the strap on my bag. Okay, sir, your numbers look all right, but chest tightness in a gentleman your age, I'd feel a lot better if we took you in and let them run some blood work. Protocol, nothing to worry about. That's not necessary, she said from the doorway. He doesn't like the hospital. I understand, it's still his call. He gets very disoriented. It's better if he stays home. I can watch him tonight. I finally looked at her, kept my face pleasant, kept the smile in place I use with drunks and mothers-in-law. Sir, I said, not breaking eye contact with her, you want to come with us and get checked out? There was a long pause, longer than it should have been. The furnace kicked on somewhere in the house. I could hear the rain on the gutter outside the bedroom window, that steady tin sound. Yes, he said, I think I would. Her face didn't change. That was the third thing. If your grandfather said he'd rather go to the hospital than stay with you, and you actually cared about him, something in your face would move. Hers didn't. I'll come along, she said. Ma'am, I appreciate that, but we don't allow riders in the back. You're welcome to meet us at Community South. I gave her the name of a different hospital than the one she'd mentioned. She didn't correct me. We got him onto the stretcher. Reese kept between her and the bag the whole time without making it obvious. She stood in the hall with her arms crossed while we wheeled him out. She was still smiling. She said, "Feel better, honey," as we passed her, and he didn't answer. In the truck, I ran his vitals again and started my chart. He was quiet. I gave him the little privacy speech we give, that anything he tells me stays with me and the doctor. He didn't say anything for about a mile. Then he said, "Would you stay at the hospital, just for a bit? I'll do what I can." He nodded, watched the ceiling of the ambulance. Every few seconds his eyes moved to the back doors, like he expected them to open. At the ER I gave report and handed him off, and when a nurse tapped my shoulder and said the gentleman in Bay 4 was asking for the lady from the ambulance, I went back. He was sitting up, color a little better. He asked me to close the curtain. "She came in July," he said, knocked on the door with a clipboard, said she was from social services, that they had me flagged because my wife passed and I lived alone. She had a badge on a lanyard. I didn't look close at it. He drank some water. His hand shook a little, not from fear, just age. She started coming by twice a week, then more. She said she was worried about me falling. She had a key made. I don't remember agreeing to that, but she has one. She sleeps in the guest room now. I don't know when that started either. I asked him if she'd taken anything. "My checkbook is in her purse," he said. "I saw it last week." I didn't say anything. I sat with him until the doctor came, told the doctor what he'd told me, and asked them to loop in the social worker on staff, the actual one. Then I went back to the truck and finished my shift, and didn't think about it much for the rest of the night, because in this job, you can't. 3 weeks later, I got called into the supervisor's office. There was a detective there. She had a photo, and she asked me to confirm it was the woman from the house on Southport. I said yes. She told me the woman wasn't a social worker, had never been a social worker. Her ID in the state database came back to a different name entirely, and under that name, she'd done this twice before in the same 3 zip codes. Same setup. Widowers, 70s and up, no kids in state. She'd moved in with one of them for almost a year before anybody figured it out. That man had signed his house over to her 2 months before he died in his sleep. Autopsy hadn't flagged anything, but the detective said the word autopsy in a way that stuck. I asked what happened to my patient. The detective said he was staying with a cousin in Bloomington now. Locks changed. Nobody had been able to find the woman since the night we transported. She'd left the house between our leaving and the officers arriving to talk to her in the morning. Took the checkbook, left the key on the kitchen counter. I still work nights. I still take those low-priority cardiac calls in the same neighborhoods. Every now and then, I get a house that's too clean, and a relative who's too calm, and I take a little longer with the patient than I need to, and I ask him one extra question about who made the call. Most of the time they called themselves.